When asked about the idea of compassion, the rabbi and teacher Esther Adler puts it this way. Compassion in Hebrew is rachamim. Rachamim is a plural form of the word rechem, meaning womb. Our sages say that compassion is like a mother's love for her child. But I think that is completely missing the point. First, rechem is womb, not mother. The womb does not love. The womb sustains and protects the unborn baby simply because that is what it does. Also, the womb connects the baby to the mother in a most intimate way, the most intimate connection two separate beings can have. The relationship is not symbiotic. The womb gives, the baby receives. From this perspective, then, rachamim, or being womb-like, means being connected to one another in an intimate, sustaining way without expectation of anything in return. Rachamim is not a feeling, it is a choice. It is the choice to acknowledge our shared humanity, no matter how I may feel about it. It is an image that stops us in our tracks. We might expect compassion to be described as a feeling, an emotion of the heart, like sympathy or pity or tenderness. But rachamim roots compassion not in feeling, but in embodiment. It is about how we hold one another in relationship, about the way we sustain life and nurture possibility within one another, just as the womb does. This is a profound teaching. It suggests that compassion, true compassion, is not an emotion we feel when we see someone suffering, nor a momentary act of kindness when the mood strikes us. Rather, it is a discipline, a practice, a way of being. It is a choice to sustain and protect life, to nurture connection, even when we don't feel particularly loving, even when it's inconvenient, even when the world makes cynicism or detachment feel easier. When we think of compassion in the Western sense, we often imagine something sentimental, a swelling of the heart, a tear shed for the suffering of others. And while empathy and tenderness have their place, Rabbi Adler's interpretation pushes us further. She reminds us that compassion is not feeling for someone, it is being with them, connected, sustaining, interdependent. The image of the womb reminds us that compassion is bodily. It is grounded, rooted, and active. The womb does not choose which nutrients to give or decide how much to protect. It gives, sustains, and shelters life simply because that is what it is made to do. To live with rachamim, then, is to orient our lives towards sustaining others. It is to live as if the world itself is within our care, as if every relationship, every interaction is part of the sacred work of nurturing life. And this is where Unitarian Universalism, with its deep affirmation of the interdependent web of existence, finds resonance. Our faith teaches that all life is interconnected, that we are bound to one another through invisible threads of relationship and care. When we practice compassion in this womb-like sense, we live out our commitment to that verb. To be compassionate is to remember that our lives are not isolated. We are not separate entities floating through existence, each pursuing our own survival. We are connected biologically, emotionally, spiritually. Compassion is the practice of living as if that connection matters. Yet, how hard is it to live this way? We live in a world that trains us to guard ourselves, to separate, to compete. We are told to put ourselves first, to toughen up, to avoid being too soft. Compassion in this context can feel naive. Every day we are bombarded with news of violence, cruelty, and injustice. The suffering of others can feel overwhelming. Many of us develop what psychologists call compassion fatigue, the emotional exhaustion that comes from caring too much for too long without relief. And yet, the Hebrew understanding of rachamim offers a subtle but vital distinction. It is not about feeling overwhelmed by another's pain. It is about choosing to sustain connection anyway. When compassion is a feeling, it can be fleeting. It rises with our moods. It rises and falls with our moods. But when compassion is a choice, it can endure. This is what Rabbi Adler means when she says rachamim is not a feeling, it is a choice to acknowledge our shared humanity, no matter how I may feel about you. Even when our emotions fail us, even when we are angry, frustrated, or numb, we can still choose to act in ways that sustain life. We can still choose to nurture, to connect, to hold space for one another's becoming. Unitarian Universalism at its core is a covenantal faith. We do not gather because we all believe the same things. We gather because we are committed to walking together in mutual care and respect. Our covenantal way of life is sustained not by greed, but by compassion, by the daily, deliberate work of holding one another in community. And so when we speak of compassion in our tradition, we are not speaking of abstract benevolence. We are talking about the practice of connection, showing up for one another when it's inconvenient, listening when it would be easier to judge, forgiving when it would be easier to walk away. The late Unitarian Universalist minister, the Reverend A. Powell Davies, once said, "The world is too dangerous for anything but truth, and too small for anything but love." To live compassionately is to live as if that were true, that love, not sentiment, but commitment, is the only force strong enough to heal the brokenness of the world. And if compassion is womb-like, as Rachamim teaches, then we might say that our churches, our congregations, are meant to be wombs of compassion, spaces where life is nurtured, where connection is protected, where people can be held in the slow, sacred process of becoming. What would it mean to see our community this way? Not as a club for like-minded people, but as a living womb, a sustaining body holding each of us as we grow toward wholeness and sending us out to nurture the world in turn. One of the most striking things about Rabbi Adler's interpretation is that Rachamim has no expectation of return. This can be hard for us. In our human relationships, we are used to exchange, kindness for kindness, care for care. But Rachamim challenges us to give without calculation, to sustain others not because they deserve it or because they might someday repay us, but simply because sustaining life is what we are here to do. It does not mean being a martyr or letting others exploit us. Boundaries are also sacred. But it does mean that our compassion should not depend on whether we feel affection for someone. Rachamim calls us to move beyond sentiment and into covenants, to act from the truth that all beings are connected, even when connection feels difficult. There is another truth hidden within Rachamim. Compassion is not passive. Because it is not merely an emotion, it does not end with feeling sorry for someone. It calls us to act. To sustain others means to create systems that nourish life. To protect others means to challenge structures that destroy it. In this sense, Rachamim is a foundation for justice. When we talk about social justice and Unitarian Universalism, we are really talking about widening the circle of compassion, expanding our womb-like care until it embraces the whole of humanity and indeed the planet itself. It is compassion that compels us to feed the hungry, to shelter the unhoused, to defend the marginalized, to protect the earth, not because we pity those who suffer, but because we recognize that their life and ours are bound together. As Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. said, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. We are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality. To practice compassion is to strengthen that web. So how might we, as a Unitarian Universalist congregation, embody this womb-like compassion in our daily life together? It begins with how we hold one another. When someone joins our community, do we make room for them, not just in our pews, but in our hearts? When someone falters or struggles, do we rush to judgment, or do we hold them tenderly, trusting that growth is possible? When conflict arises, as it always will, can we remember that compassion is a choice, not a feeling? Congregational life gives us daily opportunities to practice rachamim. We sustain one another through the transitions of life, births and deaths, illnesses and celebrations. We often care when someone is grieving or isolated. And in doing so, we become a living womb, a community that shelters and sustains the sacred process of becoming. But compassion also extends outward. When we engage in social action, we are living rachamim on a larger scale. We are saying through our deeds, your life matters. You belong in this world of care. There's one more dimension to rachamim that must not be forgotten. It includes compassion for ourselves. Too often we think of self-compassion as selfishness, but rachamim reminds us that sustaining ourselves is part of sustaining life. When we rest, when we set healthy boundaries, when we seek help, when we honor our own needs, we are participating in the same sacred work of sustaining the web. Compassion fatigue lessens when compassion is grounded in connection rather than emotion, when we remember that we are part of something larger than our individual efforts. We do not have to save the world alone. We simply have to keep the web strong, each of us sustaining what we can, where we can, as best we can. My friends, the Hebrew wisdom of rachamim invites us to imagine compassion not as something we feel, but as something we become. To be compassionate is to become a womb for the world, a place where life is nurtured, where healing begins, where hope can grow. Our Unitarian Universalist faith calls us to this work. To live with rachamim is to embody the principles we affirm: the inherent worth and dignity of every person, justice and equity in human relations, respect for the interdependent web of all existence. It is to live as those principles were not just ideas, but embodied truths, as if our very lives were instruments of compassion. May we too be womb-like, sustaining one another with patience, protecting one another with courage, and connecting one another in ways that give birth to hope. May our congregation be a place of rachamim, a sanctuary of compassion that holds us all in the sacred work of becoming. And may we go forth into the world as bearers of this womb-like compassion, choosing day by day to act from our shared humanity. For compassion is not a feeling, it is a choice that can sustain the world. May we cause it to be so. Blessed be. Amen. Shalom. Assalamu alaikum. Namaste. Thank you all so much.